The Indian Struggle, Part-14, Stormy 1930. With the dawn of the new year, there was hope and confidence in every heart. People anxiously looked to the working committee for instructions as to what they were required to do for the early attainment of independence. The Mahatma sensed the atmosphere correctly and he stated, quote, "Civil disobedience alone can save the country from impending lawlessness and secret crimes. Since there is a party of violence in the country which will not listen to speeches, resolutions or conferences but believes only in direct action," unquote. He therefore resolved to place himself at the head of the national struggle in order to keep it within the limits of non-violence. Early in January, the first order went out. January 26th should be observed all over India as the day of independence. On that day, a manifesto prepared by Mahatma and adopted by the working committee of the Congress was to be read from every platform and accepted by the people. The manifesto, which is set forth below, was at once a declaration of independence and a pledge of loyalty to the Indian National Congress and to the sacred fight for the India's liberty. Quote, "We believe that it is the inalienable right of the Indian people as of any other people to have freedom and to enjoy the fruits of their toil and have the necessities of life so that they may have full opportunities of growth. We believe also that if any government deprives the people of these rights and oppresses them, the people have a further right to alter it or to abolish it. The British government in India has not only deprived the Indian people of their freedom but has based itself on the exploitation of the masses and has ruined India economically, politically, culturally and spiritually. We believe therefore that India must sever the British connection and attain Purna Swaraj or complete independence. India has been ruined economically. The revenue derived from our people is out of all proportion to our income. Our average income is 7 paise less than 2 pence per day, and of heavy taxes we pay 20% are raised from the land revenue derived from the peasantry and 3% from the salt tax, which falls most heavily on the poor. Village industries such as hand spinning have been destroyed, leaving the peasantry idle for at least 4 months in the year and during their intellect for want of handicrafts, and nothing has been substituted as in other countries for the crafts thus destroyed. Customs and currencies have been so manipulated as to heap further burdens on the peasantry. The British manufactured goods constitute the bulk of our imports. Custom duties betray clear partiality for British manufacturers, and revenue from them is used not to lessen the burden on the masses but to sustaining a highly extravagant administration. Still more arbitrary has been the manipulation of the exchange ratio, which has resulted in millions being drained away from the country. Politically, India's status has never been so reduced as under the British regime. No reforms have given real political power to the people. The tallest of us have to bend before the foreign authority. The rights of free expression of opinion and free association have been denied to us, and many of our countrymen are compelled to live in exile abroad and cannot return to their homes. All administrative talent is killed, and the masses have to be satisfied with petty village offices and clerkships. Culturally, the system of education has torn us from our moorings, and our training has made us hug the very chains that bind us. Spiritually, compulsory disarmament has made us unmanly, and the presence of an alien army of occupation employed with deadly effect to crush in us the spirit of resistance has made us think that we cannot look after ourselves or put up a defense against foreign aggression or even defend our homes and families from the attacks of thieves, robbers and miscreants. We hold it to be a crime against man and God to submit any longer to a rule that has caused this fourfold disaster to our country. We recognize, however, that the most effective way of gaining our freedom is not through violence. We will therefore prepare ourselves by withdrawing so far as we can all voluntary association from the British government and will prepare for civil disobedience, including non-payment of taxes. We are convinced that if we can but withdraw our voluntary help and stop payment of taxes without doing violence even under provocation, the end of this inhuman rule is assured. We therefore hereby solemnly resolve to carry out the Congress instructions issued from time to time for the purpose of establishing Purna Swaraj. The reports from different parts of the country showed that the Independence Day celebrations were a great success. Unprecedented enthusiasm was exhibited everywhere, and the Mahatma felt that he could go ahead with a dynamic program. But just at this moment, the practical politician in him asserted itself. While starting the civil disobedience campaign, he wanted to leave the door open for a compromise, and he realized that the independence resolution of the Congress might prove to be a stumbling block. He also felt that some of his wealthy supporters, the Indian capitalists, were alarmed at the resolutions of the Lahore Congress. Some sort of explaining away was therefore necessary, particularly in view of the fact that the word independence implied severance of the British connection. On January 30th, he issued a statement in his paper Young India saying that he would be content with the substance of independence, and he mentioned 11 points to explain what he meant by that expression. At the same time, he virtually gave up the use of the word independence and substituted in its place the more elastic expression substance of independence, or another expression especially coined framed by him, namely Purna Swaraj, which he could interpret in his own way. The 11 points enunciated by him had a reassuring effect on all circles that had been alarmed by the idea of independence, and they paved the way of lengthy renegotiations in the month to follow. The 11 points were as follows: first, total prohibition; second, reduction of the ratio; third, reduction of the land revenue to at least 50% and making it subject to legislative control; fourth, abolition of the salt tax; fifth, reduction of the military expenditure to at least 50% to begin with; sixth, reduction of the salaries of the higher graded services to one half or less so as to suit the reduced revenue; seventh, protective tariff on foreign cloth; eighth, the passage of the coastal traffic reservation bill; ninth, discharge of all political prisoners save those condemned for murder or attempted threat by ordinary judicial tribunal; withdrawal of all political persecutions; abrogation of section 124A Indian Penal Code and regulations of 1818 and like, and permission to all Indian exiles to return; 10th, abolition of the CID Criminal Investigation Department or its popular control; 11th, issue of licenses to use firearms for self-defense subject to popular control. By the beginning of the February, the situation was favorable for the Mahatma. The working committee had vested him with dictatorial powers for conducting the civil disobedience campaign. Besides the warm response given by the country on Independence Day, the members of the different legislatures belonging to the Congress party had submitted their resignations out of deference to the mandate of the Lahore Congress. A large section of the Muslims was of course opposed to the idea of satyagraha and civil disobedience, and the Ali brothers openly appealed to their co-religionists not to heed the Congress appeal. Nevertheless, the nationalist Muslims, who were by no means negligible, were wholeheartedly with the Congress, and the northwest frontier province, a predominantly Muslim province, was going to give solid support to the coming campaign. After much searching of heart, on February 27th, the Mahatma announced his plan of campaign. The next few moves taken by him will stand out for all time as some of the most brilliant achievements of his leadership, and they reveal the height to which his statesmanship can ascend in times of crisis. Writing in Young India on February 27, 1930, he said, quote, "This time on my arrest, there is to be no mute passive non-violence, but non-violence of the most active type should be set in motion so that not a single believer in non-violence as an article of faith for the purpose of achieving India's goal should find himself free or alive at the end of the effort. So far as I am concerned, my intention is to start the movement only through the inmates of the ashrama and those who have submitted to its discipline and assimilated the spirit of its methods," referring to the possibility of a suspension of civil disobedience in the event of an outbreak of violence as in 1922. The Mahatma wrote, "Wish list therefore every effort imaginable and possible should be made to restrain the forces of violence. Civil disobedience once begun this time cannot be stopped and must not be stopped so long there is a single civil resistor left free or alive." The last statement helped to reassure all those people who had taken strong exception to the Bardoli retreat in 1922 following the manifestation of mob violence at Chauri Chaura. The Mahatma further announced his intention of defying the salt law along with 78 of his chosen followers, the members of his ashrama. He would commence a march from Allahabad to the sea coast, his pilgrimage to the sea on March 12th, and after arriving there would launch the civil disobedience campaign. That would be the signal for the whole country to take up the movement. The Mahatma decided to start this particular campaign because it would appeal to the country as a whole and especially to the poor. From time immemorial, the people had been accustomed to manufacture salt from sea water and from the soil. That right had been taken away from the people by the British government. Now the salt law, as administered, in doubly iniquitous. It prohibits the people from unleashing the salt which has been given by nature and forces them to import it from abroad. Moreover, the imposition of the salt tax serves to enhance the price of the salt which even the poorest of the poor has to buy. Explaining this point to the viceroy in a letter dated March 2, he wrote, quote, "If you cannot see your way to deal with these evils and my letter makes no appeal to your heart, then on the 12th day of this month I shall proceed with such co-workers of the ashrama as I can take to disregard the provisions of the salt laws. I regard salt tax to be the most iniquitous of all from the poor man's standpoint. As the independence movement is essentially for poorest in land, the beginning will be made with this evil. The wonder is that we have submitted to the cruel monopoly for so long." Unquote. In the same letter, which was a lengthy document, the Mahatma tried to explain to the viceroy why he was being forced to resort to civil disobedience, making it clear that the letter was not intended as a threat but was a simple and sacred duty peremptory on a civil register. The Mahatma wrote, quote, in common with many of my countrymen, I had hugged the fond hope that the proposed round-table conference might furnish a solution. But when you said plainly that you could not give any assurance that you or the British cabinet would pledge yourselves to support a scheme of full dominion status, the round-table conference could not possibly furnish the solution for which vocal India is consciously and the dumb millions are unconsciously thirsting. Needless to say, there never was any question of Parliament's verdict being anticipated. Instances are not wanting of the British cabinet in anticipation of the parliamentary verdict having pledge itself to a particular policy. The Delhi interview having miscarried, there was no option for Pandit Motilal Nehru and myself but to take steps to carry out the solemn resolution of the Congress arrived at in Kolkata at its session in 1928 in order to keep the door open for a compromise. In spite of the launching of the civil disobedience campaign, the Mahatma continued. But the resolution of independence should be cause no alarm if the word dominion status mentioned in your announcement that had been used in its accepted sense. For has it not been admitted by responsible British statement that dominion status is a virtual independence? To this letter or ultimatum of Mahatma Gandhi, the Viceroy sent a brief reply regretting that Mr. Gandhi intended to contravene the law. So true to his announced programme, the Mahatma commenced his 3 weeks march to Dandi, the sea coast village where the disobedience of the salt law was to begin. At the time, the government were skeptical about the effect that the march would produce, and they were not inclined to take him seriously. The Anglo-Indian papers began to write taunting articles, and the Statesman of Calcutta, in a leading article, wrote to the effect that the Mahatma could go on boiling sea water till dominion status was attained. The skepticism was also shared by a section of congressmen. Nevertheless, the march to Dandi was an event of historical importance which will rank on the same level with Napoleon's march to Paris on his return from Elba, or Mussolini's march to Rome when he wanted to seize political power. Fortunately for the Mahatma, he had a wonderfully good press within India and outside. In India, for days, every detail connected with the march found the widest publicity. The march on the foot enabled him to rouse the entire countryside through which he passed, and it also gave him time to work up the feelings of the country as a whole. If on the other hand he had taken the train to Delhi from Ahmedabad, arriving there the next day, he would neither have been able to rouse the people of Gujarat nor would have had enough time to work up the entire nation. While the Mahatma was marching from village to village, an intense propaganda was carried on in the neighborhood, asking the people to give up service under the crown and to prepare for non-payment of taxes, which would be started before long. At every step, the Mahatma received an unexpectedly warm welcome, and that made the government realize that the coming campaign would be a much more serious affair than they had thought at first. On April 6, after a purificatory bath in the sea, the Mahatma started civil disobedience by appropriating pieces of salt lying on the beach. Almost simultaneously, illegal salt manufacture was begun all over the country where natural conditions precluded any such campaign. Disobedience of other laws was attempted. In Calcutta, for instance, the mayor, the late Mr. J.N. Sengupta, started disobedience of the law of sedition by openly reading seditious literature in a public meeting. Boycott of foreign cloth was begun on an extensive scale, and along with that another campaign grew up for the boycott of British goods of all sorts. There was also an intensive campaign for the boycott of liquor and intoxicating drugs. To enforce the boycott, picketing by Congress volunteers was organized all over India. A few weeks after the march began, the Mahatma addressed a special appeal to the women of India in Young India, April 10, 1930. Therein he said, quote, "The much greater than men's, who calls women the weaker sex is a libel. If by strength is meant moral power, then women is immeasurably men's superior." Proceeding the Mahatma's appeal to them to take up the picketing of liquor shops and foreign cloth shops, the prohibition of intoxicating drugs and drinks would reduce the government revenue by 250 millions of rupees, while the boycott of foreign clothes would be an annual drain of nearly 600 million of rupees. He further appealed to women to devote their spare hours to spinning with a view to stimulating the production of khadi. In conclusion, he said, quote, "But there is no excitement and adventure in the liquor and foreign cloth picketing. Some sisters may retort, well, if they will put their whole heart into this agitation, they will find more than enough excitement and adventure. Before they have done with the agitation, they might even find themselves in prison. It is not improbable that they may be incited and even injured bodily. To suffer such insult and injury would be their pride. Such suffering, if it comes to them, will hasten the end." Unquote. The appeal was transmitted all over the country, and it had a magic effect. Even the women of the most orthodox and aristocratic families were moved. Everywhere women came out in their thousands to carry out the Congress mandate. Not only the government but the people of the country as well were taken by surprise at the manifestation. Temperance workers like Miss Mary Campbell, who had worked for 40 years in India, were amazed at the phenomenon. Well might foreign observers like Mr. H.N. Balfour and Mr. George Scumble say that if the civil disobedience campaign had accomplished nothing else but the emancipation of women of India, it would have fully justified itself. The energy and enthusiasm of the women stirred the men to greater effort and sacrifice. With 3 weeks of empowerment of the campaign, the government resolved to strike. On April 27th, the first emergency ordinance was promulgated called the Press Ordinance, which brought the papers under the full control of the officials. Most of the nationalist papers were seized publication for a long period as a protest. Other ordinances followed, aiming at the suppression of the different activities of the Congress. Congress organizations were declared unlawful all over the country, and an ordinance was issued enabling the government to confiscate the property belonging to them. The result of these ordinances was that the Congress could no longer longer function openly, and many of its activities like raising funds, recruiting volunteers, etc. had to be conducted in an underground manner. Nevertheless, the activities of the Congress, instead of being paralyzed by the ordinances, were further stimulated. As the meetings and processions were burned everywhere, they continued to be held in defiance of the official ban. Newspapers, bulletins, leaflets were printed and distributed by the Congress agencies in spite of official prohibition. In some places, as in Bombay, Congress propaganda was conducted by means of the radio, and the police were not able to find out from where the messages were being transmitted. Faced by a non-violent rebellion, the government first proceeded to make arrests, but that was no avail. According to the official figures, more than 60,000 civil resistors were cast in prison. Special prison had to be improvised at a short notice, but they were filled up with no time. Besides the activities described above, which were more or less common to the whole of India, there were special activities in certain provinces. For instance, in the central provinces and a part of the Bombay presidency, disobedience of forest law was started and people began to cut down timber at a will. In Gujarat, the United Provinces, and a certain districts of Bengal, particularly Midnapur district, non-payment of taxes of land and land revenue was launched. In the northwest frontier province, thanks to the efforts of Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan, better known as Frontier Gandhi, an intensive anti-government movement was on foot, including the non-payment of taxes. In spite of warlike traditions of the people there, the movement was entirely non-violent. The Frontier Gandhi had organized a corps of volunteers dressed in a red uniform who were called Khudai Khidmatgar, or servants of God. The red shirt volunteers were an eyesore to the government because their campaign was affecting the loyalty of the people who had formerly contributed some of the financial regiments to the Indian army. Moreover, because of the strategic position of the frontier province, a political movement in that part of the country was exceedingly unwelcome to the government. As soon as the government realized the serious proportions which the campaign had assumed, they became entirely ruthless and brutal in their attempts at suppression. It is not possible to describe the atrocities committed by the forces of the crown, including both police and military, in this connection. It is difficult to say which province suffered most, for each province had its tale of woe. In Bengal, the Midnapur district suffered most, and sufferings of the people gave birth to a terrorist movement for organizing reprisals against officials. Parts of the United Provinces, where the no-rent campaign was very strong, also suffered badly. In Gujarat, when the sufferings of the peasantry became unbearable, they left their homes and migrated to the neighboring state of Baroda. Indiscriminate and brutal use of force, attack on women, and wanton destruction of property contributed some of the features of illegal measures adopted by the agents of the crown towards a people who had on the whole remained strictly non-violent. The usual method of attacking satyagrahis and unarmed citizens, including women, was with the help of powerful sticks, which being iron shod or covered with leather could split human skulls with ease. Attacks were made on helpless satyagrahi prisoners as well. Where these were not sufficient for striking terror, shooting was occasionally resorted to. In most provinces where such shooting incidents occurred occasionally, but the most diabolical incident took place at Peshawar on April 23rd, where the number of people shot and killed on one day went up to several hundred. The facts are roughly these. There was a peaceful demonstration following the arrest of some local leaders. The authorities lost their heads and sent some armed cars to disperse the crowd that was by that time moving homewards. The armed cars full of soldiers rushed full tilt into the crowd without warning from behind, killing 3 people on the spot and wounding a large number. Thereupon the crowd is reported to have set fire to the cars. Soldiers were at once rushed to the spot and ordered to open fire, but the crowd did not run away. Hundreds of them stood their ground and faced the bullets. When the facts became known, the public demanded an inquiry, which the government refused. Then the working committee of the Congress appointed a committee with Mr. Vallabhbhai Patel as a chairman to inquire and report on the facts. This committee was not allowed to proceed to the frontier province. It had therefore to assemble in Punjab at a place nearest to the frontier province and collect evidence there. As soon as the report of the committee was published, it was banned by the government. Nevertheless, through the efforts of the Congress organization, wide publicity was given to it. The only redeeming feature of the Peshawar episode was the refusal of a company of Garwali soldiers to open fire on the unarmed crowd. After their refusal, they were at once disarmed, placed before a court-martial, and sentenced to long terms of imprisonment. In most of the provinces where atrocities were perpetrated, local committees were appointed by the public to inquire into and report on those incidents. Those reports would require a big volume and would be outside the scope of this book. It would not, however, be out of place to quote some lines from the second letter addressed by the Mahatma to the Viceroy early in May on the eve of his arrest, which was published in Young India on May 8, 1930. Quote, I had hoped that the government would fight the civil resistance in a civilized manner. I could have had nothing to say if in dealing with the civil resistors the government had satisfied itself with applying the ordinary process of law. Instead, wishlist the non-leaders have been dealt with more or less according to the legal formality. The rank and the file have been often savagely and in some cases even indecently assaulted. Had this been isolated cases, they might have been overlooked, but accounts have come to be from Bengal, Bihar, Utkal, the United Provinces, Delhi and Bombay, confirming the experiences of Gujarat, of which I have ample evidence at my disposal. In Karachi, Peshawar and Madras, the firing would appear to have been unprovoked corrupt and unnecessary. Bones have been broken, private parts have been squeezed for the purpose of making volunteers give up salt, and which is valueless to the government but precious to the volunteers. At Mathura, an assistant magistrate is said to have snatched the national flag from a 10-year-old boy. The crowd that demanded restoration of the flag, thus illegally seized, is reported to have been mercilessly beaten back. That the flag was subsequently restored betrayed a guilty consciousness. In Bengal, there seem to have been only a few persecutions and assaults about salt, but unthinkable cruelties are said to have been practiced in the act of snatching flags from volunteers. Paddy fields are reported to have been burned and tables forcibly taken. A vegetable market in Gujarat has been raided because the dealers would not sell vegetables to officials. These acts have been taken place in front of the crowds who have submitted without retaliation in pursuance of the Congress mandate. Yet this is only the fifth week of the struggle. Unquote. An English disciple of Mahatma Gandhi, Miss Madeline Slade, paid a visit to Bulsar in Gujarat on June 6th to see with her own eyes how the Satyagrahi volunteers engaged in the non-violent raid on the Dharsana salt depot were being treated by the police. She published her report in Young India in the issue of June 12th on 1930. Therein, she stated that she had found evidence of following injuries perpetrated on the Satyagrahi volunteers. First, lathi blown on head, chest, stomach and joints. Second, thrust with lathis in private parts of abdominal regions. Third, stripping of a man naked before beating. Fourth, tearing of loin clothes and thrusting of sticks into anus. Pressuring and squeezing of the testicles till a man becomes unconscious. Dragging of a wounded man by legs and arms, often beating them the while. Throwing of a wounded man into the thorn hedges or into salt water. Riding of horses over men as they lie or sit on the ground. Thrusting of pins and thorns into men's bodies, sometimes even when they are unconscious. Beating of men after they become unconscious, and other vile things too many to relate besides foul language and blasphemies calculated to hurt as much as possible to most sacred feelings of the Satyagrahis. To turn now to other events, in April 1930 was a month bristling with a sensational incidents. Every day seemed to bring forth some new development, and no part of the country was free from it. The Indian Legislative Assembly did not have a quiet time either, though the Congress members were out of it. Pandit Madan Mohan Malviya, who was leading the independent party there, assumed the leadership of the opposition. Early in April, he walked out of the assembly together with his followers as a protest against the manner in which government had forced on the assembly the principle of imperial preference in connection with the cotton tariff bill. 2 days later, he resigned from the assembly together with other members of his party. This was followed by the resignation of the president of the assembly, Mr. Vallabhbhai Patel. He addressed 2 letters to the Viceroy in which he stated that after the resignation of the Congress party and Pandit Malviya's independent party, the assembly had lost its representative character, and in the circumstances, he felt that his place was with his people. He also protested against what seemed to him a change of front on the part of the government on the constitutional question. Another incident of a total different character took place in the April in the easternmost part of the country. That was the armory raid in Chittagong in East Bengal. A number of young men belonging to a local revolutionary party led by